Welcome back for our Big Talk special presentation, which is our second fellow induction. I'd like to introduce Dr. Gary Lillian, who will be introducing our new fellow.
Thanks, Lynn, and welcome everyone. As ISBM Research Director, it's an annual privilege for me to recognize and induct one or more ISBM Fellows. ISBM Fellows are a group of esteemed individuals who represent one of the most valuable assets of the Institute. They've got to meet 4 criteria, and let me share these with you. ISBM Fellows are recognized scholars or thought leaders in one or more domains of B2B marketing. They're dedicated to the mission of advancing both the theory and practice of the discipline, and that really matches up very well with the ISBM's mission that's focused on both the development of new knowledge in the B2B domain as well as the dissemination of that knowledge. They are dedicated to working with practitioners involved in field-based research, in the educational domain, and in basically making their research accessible to folks beyond the academic community. But they're also active in the academic community in the B2B domain. And in all cases, the ISBM Fellows have been involved in academia to either a greater or lesser extent. The Kurds are an esteemed group, and if you take a look down this list here, I'm sure most of you will recognize one or more of their names. Some of them have spent more of their time, more of their career in practice. Some have spent more of their career on the academic side. But all of them are thought leaders in the business-to-business domain in a specific area of specialization. It gives me great honor and a privilege to congratulate Rob Palmatier. And Rob, it's a privilege to induct you as an ISBM Fellow. Rob is Professor of Marketing and John C. Narver Chair of Business Administration at the Foster School at the University of Washington. And Rob founded and serves as the Research Director of the Center for Sales and Marketing Strategy at the university there. Prior to entering academia, Rob was a practitioner. He held various industry positions, including as President and COO of C&K Components, which is a global electronics company. And he was European General Manager in Sales and Marketing Manager at Tyco Raychem. And he also served as a U.S. Navy Lieutenant on board nuclear submarines. We don't have many folks in academia who've had nuclear submarine experience. So it's got a unique background. Rob's research has focused on marketing strategy, customer loyalty, sales management, marketing channels, and our focus here will be on relationship management. Relationship marketing, I'm sorry. His research has been highlighted in Nature, in the New York Times Magazine, in the LA Times, been shown on NPR and MSNBC, and Rob is editor-in-chief of the Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science. Rob has, again, got an extensive publication record, is really quite remarkable. In fact, he's been cited as the 12th most productive scholar in marketing in our top 4 journals between the period of 2017 to 2007 to 2016. It's really quite a remarkable record. And I downloaded his list of honors from his Vita, and it's about a page and a half, and I think you'd probably prefer that we just do a few highlights. So let me just focus on a few of these. He received in 2012 the Varadarajan Award for Early Contributions to Marketing Strategy Research. In 2008, he got the Howard Maynard Award for Significant Contributions to Marketing Theory and Thought to the best paper in the Journal of Marketing. He got the Sheth Journal of Marketing Award in 2015 for the Journal of Marketing article that made a long-term contribution to the discipline of marketing. This is an especially prestigious award because you really can't tell in an academic article what its impact is until it's been out there for a while. So again, one of our most prestigious awards. And finally, the Lewis Stern Award, which is based on 4 criteria: contribution to theory, practice, originality, technical competence, and impact on the field of channels of distribution. Rob has won that award 4 times, in 2011, 2014, 15, and 17. He's been involved, he's chaired proposal committees for the National Research Council, the National Academy of Sciences, and he's had an extensive consulting career as well. Now, from the standpoint of the ISBM, he's taught relationship marketing in the ISBM PhD seminar series several times, and he teaches that to prospective PhD candidates. He's been a regular attendee at ISBM academic conferences, and he's been a mentor at our ISBM PhD camps. I can't think of anybody who is more qualified to be an ISBM fellow than Rob. So please join me in congratulating Rob, and I'd like to invite Rob to share his thoughts on some leading-edge research findings in the domain of relationship marketing. And I'll also provide his views on the most fruitful areas for new research in the domain. And Rob will follow up with this at the end, but I invite ISBM members who might be interested in learning more about and possibly participating in this research domain to contact Rob directly. So again, with no further ado, join me in congratulating Rob. And Rob, please share your thoughts on this topic.
Well, thank you, Gary, for a very nice introduction. I'm also very honored to be inducted as an ISBM fellow. It's the group of people who precede me are very esteemed, and I've used their research and read their research for many, many years to come. What I wanted to just spend the next few minutes to do is I wanted to talk about my research domain, which is relationship marketing, talk about some insights that I've found in the last decade of researching this area. I've just highlighted a few that I think coming from the business area that I found the most interesting, and then also maybe spend a little time talking about where I see some very interesting future research areas to look at. As I mentioned, and Gary mentioned also, my primary research domain is relationship marketing, and in some cases I find people don't always converge on what that means. So I thought maybe starting with a definition. It's really the process of identifying, developing, maintaining, and terminating, in some cases, yes, even ending, relational exchange with a purpose, and in this case, we're doing it to enhance performance. And why do I think relationships remain key to business performance? I think most B2B practitioners and researchers alike would say it's definitely been important in the past, but it's also important in the future, even in the online environment in many cases. And the reason I do that, there's a number of factors, but one is about 25 to 30% of your brain is involved in cognitive and emotional functions that has to do with relationships. So much of marketing actually taps into this part of our brain, and it causes, if you will, emotional responses. And very often these emotional responses are much larger in magnitude than maybe something we would look at from a value recognition. Also, there has been a recent meta-analysis done by colleagues that found that when they compared the elasticity, if you will, or the impact of $1 spent on relationship versus $1 spent on advertising, relationships was about twice as high as advertising. So relationships continue to remain very impactful on performance. And then a meta-analysis that I did a number of years ago looked at 20 years of data across 38,000 relationships, and this was both in the B2B space and the B2C space. And we found that if you have trust and commitment with your customers are much more likely versus any other factor you can do to give you good word of mouth. And I'm just reporting a sample size weighted correlation or measurement adjusted correlation coefficient of 0.61, which is a very large effect. So if you want your customers to speak well about you, that is generated from relationships because they're putting their own relationship at risk when they recommend you, usually for no financial benefit. But if we look at also the impact of relationships on objective performance, sales, market share, profitability, it also has a very strong impact, a correlation of 0.34. Lastly, there's a number of trends in the business environment now that are actually making relationships more important. Research has shown that in the services context, when you're selling services, relationships are more important than when you're selling a kind of a more commodity-like product. And why is that? Because services are intangible, require more co-production. Relationships are very important in the governance mechanisms to manage that risk and make the customer feel comfortable with that risk. Also, research shows that as people age, relationships become more important. And if you look at the population in the U.S., especially the purchasing power population, they are aging. Finally, many firms are looking for ways to differentiate themselves and build a sustainable competitive advantage when they have a more of a Me Too product. And the reason that is when you come out with a new product in the U.S., fairly soon, someone usually from an international location will come out with almost a look-alike product. So you need ways to differentiate you. Obviously, brand is one, but relationships would be another. And now I'll just highlight a couple research findings that I found coming from the business world as kind of most interesting. First is the impact of gratitude and unfairness. I call them the twin pillars of relationship marketing. And a lot of people initially in the B2B space would say, oh, we're very cognitive, we're rational decision makers, and these emotions of gratitude and unfairness aren't very important. Well, research shows otherwise. For one thing, both of these emotions are hardwired into your brains. When they do fraternal versus identical twins analysis, they show there's a large, if you will, genetic component to these characteristics. They start showing up when you're 3 and 4 years old. So it's not something that you can just turn on and off. It's always operating. And in studies where we had value, trust, commitment, we find gratitude has a significantly larger, in some cases 2x larger impact. And why does gratitude matter? Well, when somebody gives you something, you feel gratitude, you feel this innate desire to reciprocate. You need to do something back. Come to find out, if you do act on that feeling and you reciprocate, endorphins are released in your brain. So even though in some cases we think, oh, that's only for business to consumer, the research shows this is happening to business buyers as well. And you look at what's the importance of unfairness? Well, come to find out, you're hardwired. When somebody treats you unfair, you really feel a deep need to punish that person. And often you'll punish that person or that firm even at a cost to yourself. Even though it might not be rational. Maybe you're going to do no business with this company anymore, but you still feel the need to punish them. The evolutionary psychologists have a very clear argument for this. This is how they undermine free rider effect. So one thing I took from this coming into it, as my background before business was electrical engineering, it's very cognitive, kind of more of an engineering science. I didn't think these emotions were going to be as important, and I've found these emotions are equally as important in the B2B space as they are in the B2C space. Another thing that probably isn't going to be surprising to that many people is that who owns the relationship? We have found that when you have boundary spanners, and if you think of a field salesperson, it's probably pretty clear to you that you say, oh, the salesperson owns a lot of the relationship. But we've also replicated this in the inside salesperson space, that the inside person can own the relationship. And that relationship, when you show that it has a very strong effect, obviously stays with the salesperson when they leave to a new firm. And in some research, we showed that in the B2B space, that customers will shift 26% of their business to follow a salesperson where they have a strong relationship to a new company if the products are of equal performance. The last thing on the insight, and this is kind of a fairly recent paper, we did a very large-scale meta-research with over 40,000 relationships across the world. We actually looked at the top 25 countries by GNP, which captured close to 90% of the world's GNP, and we evaluated the strength of relationship marketing across different countries. And we found that in the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, relationship marketing is 55% more effective. What do I mean by that? If you build a relationship in these countries, its effect on objective performance over time is 55% larger than what you would see for the same level of relationships in the U.S. And why is that? Well, come to find out in many of these countries, not only is it maybe a little bit more traditional or culturally driven, but it's also driven because of the lack of institutional systems and institutional trust. You have to count on relationships because maybe the legal system or other systems are not available as recourse. If you compare the U.S. to the other 24 largest countries in the world by GNP, outside the U.S. is 11% on average more effective. Relationships are more effective at driving performance than in the U.S. So in many cases when people are coming from the U.S. and shifting to international markets, you should say relationship marketing probably would be expected to even impact it larger. Now to turn to some future research. If I look at some of my present and future research and what I think is going to be interesting, I'm shifting to less focus on the individual dyad, and what we mean by that is the relationship maybe between a salesperson and an industrial buyer. And we're looking at firm-level relationship marketing strategies. And one we've done quite a bit of work on, and we have a number of papers, is looking at restructuring your firm to be customer-centric. What do I mean by this? I think probably the primary example is IBM. IBM used to be structured around mainframes, mini computers, personal computers. So each product, they were product divisions reporting to the CEO. And a number of years ago, they shifted and went to market-centric or customer-centric divisions, government, healthcare, financial services. Come to find out, when you organize your firm around these units, you are much better able to build relationships with your customers. You have much better knowledge of your customers' needs and desires, and you detect changes and are able to respond quicker. Because when a small change happens, let's say in healthcare, if you're a division focused on healthcare, all of your customers are seeing this change. It's not one customer of 10, so you're able to detect it very quick. However, it doesn't always work shifting to customer-centric structures. There are conditions that make it work. Come to find out, probably the most important condition is if you're in a market where the marketplace has probably above average profit margins. In other words, customers are willing to pay for better support. We found that shifting to customer-centric structure pays off more. Interesting, when we studied it over time, we found that when you first shift to a customer-centric structure, it actually damages performance. The firms on average reduced return on assets by about 39%. So in the short term, it actually hurt. And the reason for that, we came to understand, was what we were seeing is that firms were restructuring their whole customer interface. They were hiring, in some cases, HP hired close to 20,000 extra people to manage this shift to customer-centric, and everybody's job is changing. So there's this learning period that might take, in our research, on average, it took about 2.5 years before the firms ultimately had a significant improvement above when they started the shift. In this case, it was an 11% improvement on average. So while customer-centric structure can pay off, and in some firms it's paid off very well, it depends on the conditions, and it does take some time. And in many cases, firms don't want to wait that long. Another area that I think is very interesting for research is this multi-channel communication. I think everybody recognizes that customers are buying through multiple channels, be it internet, salespeople, online, whatever. But what we're studying in this study was communication. How do you communicate with your customers? And what we found is that customers now, some of the norms have changed in how they deal with it. Buyers and customers alike are much busier, and they want the ability to change their communication channel, not just their purchasing channel, but their communication channel. And we differentiate channels by how rich they are. We say face-to-face is the richest because it has visual cues, proximity cues, it happens in real time. And something like emails would be very lean because you don't have visual cues, you don't have any verbal cues, you're just having the text. What we found is customers want to move up and down these communication channels based on what's going on. We found in onboarding period, so that's the first couple months after you started a relationship, richer channels pay off much more. So if you want to spend time on face-to-face and the extra cost, do it early in the relationship. But after you've done the face-to-face, you can manage the relationship with phone calls and emails just fine, except when there's very complex messages or very emotional-laden conversations. Both of those require richer channels. Lastly, we studied the effect and the persistence of the effect. In other words, how long do the effects last? And probably no surprise, but face-to-face lasts longer than phone, in this case about 2 times. So we could detect on objective performance. After a salesperson had a face-to-face visit, we could detect it for twice as long as after the person had a phone call. However, which I think is very interesting, face-to-face lasts 190 times longer than an email. So I think we ought to take away that a quick email has just no way the lasting power of a face-to-face channel. So those are kind of 2 of the areas that I find very interesting, these organizational-wide relationship marketing programs, not just working at the dyad, and we're looking at things like metrics and leadership and culture also. And then also, now that we're in this multi-channel environment, how can we do it with different types of communication channels? Well, that concludes kind of my presentation of a few insights of relationship marketing, where I think the research is going in the future. Lastly, I'd like to thank once again ISBM for inducting me as an ISBM Fellow. Thank you.
Rob, again, thank you so much. And after so many insights in such a short time, I hope it's clear to all of us why Rob is eminently qualified to be an ISBM Fellow. Again, Rob, thanks and congratulations. And on that note, let me turn things back over to Lynn.
Oh dear. Okay, I just want to thank everyone for attending this presentation and congratulate Rob again on being inducted as a fellow. I thank you all for your attendance. We're going to close this session now, and I invite you to join us after lunch at 1 o'clock for our next session. Again, thank you very much for your attendance and your time here, and we'll see you at 1 o'clock.